Welcome to the Prof Talk Pod, brought to you by the Engaged Professor. Every 2 weeks, join us as we talk about tips and tricks to help you connect with your students, engage with industry, and stay up to date on all the teaching trends. We'll give you actionable strategies that will help improve your teaching today. Thank you for being here. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome to the Prof Talk Pod. My name is Becky Aiken, and I am the Program Director of Professional Performance at the University of Kansas with my co-host Katie. Katie is you better say their official title so I don't get it wrong, Katie.
I'm a teaching professor in the Department of Accounting at Indiana University of Bloomington.
Awesome. We are talking today a little bit about student evaluations. So, for some of you, when you're listening to this, either your student evaluations, those end of the semester places where students give a feedback on your teaching, are coming up or maybe are getting rolled out. And I know for me, the student evaluations, I still remember the first time I got mine. I had to open a bottle of wine. They were horrible. I've talked about that on the podcast before, but I really, really value them. But in COVID, we shifted to doing them all online everywhere that I had worked.
Okay.
And that had made response rates go down significantly because they just get an email from the university that says, "Hey, your teaching evaluations are open, fill them out." And if you do nothing else, those are definitely not getting filled out. And so as I started at KU and was learning the new systems here for how they did evaluations, my first semester, I just didn't get any feedback. And that's bad for a lot of reasons. One, I was teaching new classes. So don't know if they went well. And two, when you get evaluated to determine if you can get promoted or for us reappointment, because we don't have tenure in the school professional studies, there's no data for my supervisor to look at
Right.
to determine if I'm a good teacher. And even the second semester, I had 5 students complete it. 5 students is not representative of the class, so that data isn't that useful because it can be really skewed in either a good or a bad way. And so I always think it's good at this time of year to think really intentionally, and I'm trying to be better at this too, which is why it was an idea for an episode about how to get students to actually do the course evaluations.
Yeah. Man, this is a big, big topic, isn't it, Becky? First of all, thank you so much for having me back. I always love being on here to talk about things. As you were talking, I was like, yes, that happened to me. Yes, that happened to me. I've been at Indiana University my entire academic career. So I'm actually finishing up my 15th year in academia, which is kind of crazy to say. Something that it kind of happened to me though in the middle where we moved to an online course evaluation system about 10 years ago. And what was weird about that for me is that in my graduate program, we had already been doing online course evaluations, but graduate students, in some cases, are more likely to fill them out. I certainly was motivated, and there were just like different parameters in place. And so I went on maternity leave. I came back to online course evaluations, and it was just an absolutely um, different ball game, if you will. I felt like I had no idea how to manage it, how to navigate it, to what extent they were important. And then in 2021, our university faculty council, so Indiana University has 9 campuses, 7 regional and 2 R1s, and the university faculty council in charge of faculty governance for the entire university put out what I think was a very, very important statement that said numerical course evaluation data can no longer be the primary metric for performance, promotion, or award evaluation. And so we have had quite a significant cultural, mental, and I think practical shift in the way we value and evaluate course evaluations on this campus, with I think some mixed end results.
Yeah, I think that the perspective of how we use them, and I think that's become similar across campuses, is that, they can't be the sole measure or the primary measure of teaching effectiveness. But at the same time, even if so I've made this argument before. Have you heard of IDEA evaluations, Katie?
Yes.
Yeah, so we use those at Illinois State University, and they had questions in there. We chose learning objectives, and we got evaluated on whether students could identify whether we were moving them toward learning objectives.
Yes.
And I struggled hard with that because unless I'm explicitly telling students consistently every day, this is what we're doing to meet this objective, the likelihood of them, because they're not teachers, right?
Right,
Them
right,
connecting what we're doing to this specific learning outcome was pretty slim, and so I always
right.
struggle with that part of it, but what I do really value is their feedback on the qualitative feedback, like the
Yes,
open-ended feedback, especially about, like, what they thought went well, what was helpful for their learning, what might not have been, is really useful, and their perception of me and how I'm showing up in the classroom space and how if I'm helpful, if I'm responsive. We've talked about that a little bit before, like knowing where student expectations are, like is did they perceive 24, 48 hours as responsive? That doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to completely change to responding in an hour, but it's good to keep track of where student expectations move as new students come into our classrooms and expect
absolutely.
things because of their own experiences. So there's for me, I like to have the individual perspective of students and student perceptions to guide my own structuring of classes, but it's really hard to do that if they
They
don't.
don't respond.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's a balance. I like the idea, by the way, of the idea framework a lot. I love it because I'm an assurance of learning person. And I
Yeah.
always say when I talk about assurance of learning, when I talk about course evaluation data relative to promotion or just performance evaluation, I give a lot of talks at IU about stuff like that. I always say course evaluations are your students' perception of how much they learned in your class. Like not whether or not they learned, but how much they think they learned. And just kind of a side note, assurance of learning is going to become a performance metric at the business school starting next year. I'm one of the people leading the charge on figuring out how we can do that equitably. So that is a piece of it. Whether that's belongs in the course evaluations, I think is like a little trickier, right? Because students aren't teachers. And I think a lot of times they reflect I wish they could do course evaluations like a year later and be like, oh
Yeah,
yeah, I
to see
actually
if it
did learn in that.
stuck.
That is a class that I enjoyed rather than just right after the class being stressed, maybe have written a page about me during the semester about all their grievances, right? Like, they're definitely a valuable tool, and I think it's worth thinking about how we can use them to be equitable for ourselves and provide useful data. So one example is at IU, the open-ended questions should be great, but they don't put the word learn in any of them. So it's what did you like most? What did you like least? I mean, they could literally say like she has frizzy hair, which they have
Yeah,
not done
it's
that
not helpful.
before, but you know, or what did you like most? It could be she didn't have class when it rained one time. Literally anything. And I wish that there was more thought at the university level in general, not just at IU, going into how we are asking students what to measure. So I personally find a lot more value on the open-ended stuff out of my midterm evaluations that I self-administer because I can make changes during the class, which I always do. But yeah, how we frame it to our students, I think is a really important component of this conversation.
Well, and since you do the assurance of learning, Katie, I'm going to put that on my list for us talking because that's also something we're really shifting toward in KU. And having built the assessment plan for professional performance, would love to do an episode just talking
Yeah,
about like how we
definitely.
communicate the importance of assurance learning to faculty and get buy-in there. So
And it
I
it
love
connects
that.
with this topic because they can absolutely love you. You can be amazing. You give everybody A's. You're so cool. You cuss in class, and they didn't learn a single thing in your class.
Correct.
So is that I'm going to talk a little bit about equity here, Becky. Is that really an equitable way of measuring us as performers in our classrooms, right?
Yeah, there's lots of research on bias in student evaluations. If you teach in a male dominated degree program. Like I can still
I
remember
do.
back.
I think you do too, right?
Yeah, yes, and, when I taught sport, I did. I actually have seen a shift in that now that I'm teaching more in the content creator,
Yeah,
influencer space, but there's lots of research that talks about how gender can impact course evaluation, so I think there's definitely an equitable bent there, and that's why I like to think about this on an individual faculty level as focusing first, even if you don't believe they should be used in the overall evaluation of your effectiveness, but how can you make them more useful for you
yes,
as takeaways to continue to improve what you do and to understand if what you are doing is connecting at all, even if they can't say, I specifically learned this. And one of the things that I've done in the past that has really helped me get more responses that I need to do a better job with now that I'm at KU was explaining like why do we do these things? What are they
yes,
used for
yes,
to students? And then
definitely,
telling them how I tell them how I have used them in the past, specific examples of students said that this assignment didn't really make very good sense to them. They would have liked a more interactive way to complete it. And then telling students the reason that the assignment was what it was this semester was built on student feedback. So your feedback doesn't just go into the ether and never get looked at. It matters,
right.
it's helpful, it's useful in constructive ways and
Yes,
then help them structure that open-ended feedback to be constructive. Like, if you say what you didn't like, tell me what else you might have liked. I don't care if you
yes,
complain your little heart out, but then give me something to work on and how I could make
right,
it better
right,
because
right.
I want it to be better. I Your complaints are valid and useful, but they don't give me much to go on if you don't
Well,
frame them
yeah,
constructively.
and I think you bring up a good point, which is filtering out the stuff you can control. So I am teaching at 8 o'clock for the first time, 8 a.m. for the first time in a decade this semester. And I don't think my class's vibes are going to go this way, but they could. This is a common comment to get. She was fine. I don't like the time.
Cool.
Okay, sorry. It was the only time that was open. You made a choice to put it's an elective. You made a choice to put that, on your schedule. That those types of comments don't matter and from a practical perspective, but they do impact your evaluations, right? And so being able to filter just because you get a score, just because there are comments, does not mean that those comments are useful. It does not mean you should blow them off, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have value add for you.
Well, and that might be a situation where we're always balancing a line of how do I present evaluations to my students without feeling like I'm telling them what I want them to say. But
Yes,
my personal perspective is I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, I would love for you to focus on the things that I can
absolutely.
control in this class. Even if there are some things that were frustrating to you, if you give me feedback on things that I am able to change, that's going to be more valuable to really focus their attention on that. I think
Yes.
can help. It's not students are still gonna want to complain, and it's fine because we complain. They're allowed
Yeah, of
to
course.
complain, but
Yes,
help them
absolutely, and they
structure to
should.
make it useful, and they should, yeah, they should
Yeah,
absolutely like, if every single student said, "I hate this 8 AM class," maybe you could get around somebody in scheduling to say, "Is there any other option?" Right? Like, it's still useful, but I always like to remind them of, I if you can format that or tell me why. Don't just
yes,
tell me, "I
yes,
hated this, I don't like to get up," but did it actually negatively impact your learning? Because that I
yes.
need to know, that I want to know.
Or I hated the 8 AM class because it wasn't interactive enough. The subject was fine, but I was getting informal feedback last night that my students actually go to my 8 AM because it is because I keep them entertained. And they're like, "We don't say that about, very many 8 Ams." I was like, "Okay, well, that's a useful metric right there." I think another thing that course evaluations are not is a formal complaint mechanism to administration. They are
Yeah.
not bias incident reports. They are not formal grievance reports. And so one thing I remind students of is if they're and it's typically when I'm giving advice about other classes or if a student has an issue with a different professor, if students do have a formal grievance or they are worried about bias or FERPA violations, which I hear occasionally, they need to document that formally. It will not be an anonymous process, it'll be a confidential process. And course evaluations are not where those very serious allegations belong.
Well, and you should tell students that too, because they may
Yes,
expect that if they put it in the course evaluation, someone will do something.
and that's what I'm
But
saying.
but
Course
nobody
evaluations
gets
are
to do
anonymous.
anything. Yeah, they're
You
not
can't
gonna
I mean,
there's no way to do anything.
your department chair can flag it and talk to you, the instructor, about it, but the student won't have a measurable outcome to resolve that issue.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I wanna before we talk about some ways to encourage participation, I wanna circle back to something Katie said, which was some of their open-ended questions don't have the word learn in them. And if your university gives you the opportunity, add a couple questions
Yes,
that will help you to get more from your students that will be
yes.
useful. So if you piloted a new assignment this year and you wanna ask specifically about that assignment, you should add a question that says, "Was this assignment helpful for you? Did it help you learn? Why? How?" Will they fill it out? I don't know. But
Maybe.
if you might get something, it's better than not trying. It takes 5 minutes of your
Yeah,
time if your
I would say
university
that
allows it.
yeah, that's a really important component of this. I would say if you do my university does allow open-ended questions like that we create. We always get comments or told or feedback that if we're gonna write a question like that, we need to make sure that we're writing it in a way that would give us the answer we want, right? So did you like this assignment? Yeah, like yes or no, or asking about something sort of unrelated to the classroom is not going to give you a as direct of an answer. So I definitely think about how what an ideal response would look like if somebody were to give you feedback and write the question that way. Maybe even ask ChatGPT or your generative AI of choice to help you frame how you would talk to students. Because keep in mind, students are sort of like going through these. Sometimes they mix up the numbers, like the highest, lowest on
Mhm.
the scale. They're not thinking super hard about what they're doing most of the time in these evaluations. Give them an easy way to answer the question in the way that would make the information most useful to you.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And the other thing that might help students value them a little bit more is you mentioned you do your own mid-semester evals, I do
I
as
do
well.
too, actually.
So give them a chance to practice and then reinforce the importance of the evaluation to you. So then at the end of the semester, they're not like surprised. This is just a thing Katie does. It's not
Yes,
out of the
yes,
norm or
that it
out of the
feels routine
ordinary.
to them rather than a one-off. Absolutely. I think that's a great piece of advice. I like mid-semester evaluations, and this is a topic that we can talk about on a different episode if we haven't already. But I like mid-semester evaluations. I do 2 a semester, one closer to the beginning of the semester and one closer, like, to the middle end. They vent sometimes in those. They just need to get
Yeah.
stuff off their chest, and I have found since I've started doing those that they vent aimlessly less in end of semester formal evaluations if they had a chance to air their grievances during the semester.
You know, in marketing, we intentionally try to do that. If you've ever used a service company like a lawn care service or had somebody come and fix your gutters, you probably got a text message with a link to give them a review, a number of
Yes.
stars. And if you give them less than 3, it sends you to their internal system to complain. And if you give them more than 3, it sends it to Google to post a review.
Oh,
So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's a very similar concept to like give them the opportunity to be mad and
yeah,
'cause sometimes we all just need that. We all just need that sometimes, and so give them that opportunity early, and then also you can look at what is making them frustrated to see, is there
yes.
any way I can make this better
You
so
can
that it
fix
doesn't
it.
yes, it cannot
You can fix
continue
it
to
during the
be a
semester.
problem. Yeah,
Or I've had situations in mid-semester, I don't wanna cannibalize this, and I would so much rather have this information mid than at the end where it's like, "I am so sorry my grandma died, and I've been struggling mentally, blah, blah." I can email that person during the semester and say, "Let's right the ship. How can I help?" Rather than being like, "Oh my god, this anonymous person is telling me they had this tragic family event that I did not know about. I wish I could have helped you," right?
correct.
So, that way, like, it's not even just make my course evaluations better. It's the filter so that you aren't surprised at the end by information that you really wish you had known when you could have fixed it. I fix stuff all the time mid-semester because I know about it.
Well, and that's I remember some of my most frustrating times early on were getting things where it's like, if you had only told me, I would have
Yes,
done that differently. I would have
yes,
been happy to know that I could have
yes,
done that differently and
yes,
then maybe made your experience better. And I think even saying that to students when you are giving those mid-semester evals, saying, listen, I what I don't want to have happen is get to the end and you tell me that you hated everything because I can't do anything about it then, and I don't want you I
Yes,
actually do
yes.
care if you hate
Well,
everything.
and there's a benefit to that too, Becky, which is that in the end of the year course evaluations, it's possible you'll get comments that say, "She listened to me. She made
Right.
changes when she valued our feedback." I actually just did this. I had 3 major assessment weeks before finals in my class. We're in the middle of one right now as we're recording in March. The first one, my students were like, "We did not like the way you asked us the questions." Like I had them do a briefing deck, and I was like, "Okay, if you didn't like that, let's try something different." And I'm already, it's not even due yet. They're like, "Oh my gosh, this is so much better. Thank you for not making us do this again." Now, instead of getting, "I hated the briefing decks. Why did she make us do that?" It is, those assessments felt valuable to me because I
Yep.
switched course. It was not a difficult ask, right?
Yeah,
And
I
that,
love that.
we really are talking about in the end of semester course evaluations. Students will feel more motivated to talk about you if they see that you care about manageable change in your classroom.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean letting them drive the whole bus. It just means
Oh,
being open to thinking that when we're subject matter experts, we think one way, and that's not the way it always comes across. I tell students all the time, what I say makes sense to me. That doesn't mean it has to make
yes.
sense to you. And
Yes,
I need to know when
absolutely.
it doesn't.
And to be honest with you, like, I if it's not gonna, like, harm you, or if it's an easy change, it's like, "Yeah, sure, absolutely." Sometimes my students are surprised too. They're like, "You can do that? You'll change?" It's like, "Yeah, that was a super easy ask."
Super
Like,
easy.
not that deep. Like, let's just go ahead and make that. And that, I think, so we're gonna talk response rates next, I think. I teach seniors. They do not care
Yeah, that's hard.
evaluations because they're never gonna see IU again. Well, not for a while,
Yeah.
probably. But I think they're more motivated to talk about me if they can talk about progression, right? So
Yeah,
I
I
think
love
that that's
that.
a useful tool.
Okay, yes. So how to get students to take them. I think one of the easiest, not easiest, one of the possibly more effective ways is to carve out that 15, 20 minutes of class time where you say, get on your laptops, your phones. I'm going to step outside, remind them it's anonymous, remind them you don't get to see them. Them doing them in the classroom isn't going to change anything about when you get the results, and give them the time to do it,
Mhm.
especially if you value it, because that also shows them that you value, and
Yes.
you might get deeper, more rich feedback when you make the time for it. So that's my number 1 thing. Katie, you got an idea
I
you wanna
agree with
share?
that. I struggle with that one, and, like, probably many of our colleagues listening would struggle because I have asynchronous assessment week right before finals, and there is no time in the classroom for me, to do that. Instead, the big tip that I give is to flood their Canvas with announcements and pressure people to do it. Becky, I think it's important for us to talk in this how to motivate people, conversation, to talk about boundaries that our schools or university might
Mhm.
implement about ethical parameters for course evaluations. So, for example, in my business school, we have really, really, really strict boundaries around what we are and are not allowed to do to motivate students to complete course evaluations. So, I am not allowed to give bonus credit for students to complete course evaluations. I am not allowed to withhold grades. I am not allowed to bring food or cookies or like talk about grades in any capacity when I'm talking about course evaluations. I'm sure I'm missing some things. Um, but my school put some pretty, I think, very, very, very important ethical boundaries around course evaluation completion. The downside to that is it makes it difficult to motivate students outside of just please, please, like we literally like beg them, right? But I do think that you should be conscious whether or not your school or university requires it to think about some of the ethical parameters around course evaluation response rates.
Yeah, I do think that's really important because everywhere I've been has been a little bit different. I
Yep.
mean, generally speaking, everywhere I've been is like, don't try to bribe them with food because college students love food. So that would be a low hanging fruit, right? Interestingly enough, at KU, we are allowed to incentivize completion. Now, how they prove completion is, if tens it's like, take a screenshot of the you've completed this,
Oh,
And so like 10 students could submit the same one, and I would
So
never
ours would be
know.
like if 90% of the
That
class.
so that's the way, yeah, that's the way that
Yeah,
I prefer to do it, is make it for class completion, and so
yes.
I actually tried that in the fall, and it was almost successful in one course. The other course, it literally did not. The smaller course, which is surprising because the smaller course was the course where students really knew each other, it didn't make one bit of difference. It didn't move the
Really?
needle at all to have individual class completion, and I will say that incentive isn't super useful if students are mostly doing well in your class, because they don't really care
Right,
about 5
right.
points if they're
And
doing
then
well.
yes, it's not useful if students are doing well in your class. It is really difficult to implement if it's a grade curve, a course prescriptive average, which all of the accounting courses and most of the business courses do. If you offer bonus and you're right on the border of, your course prescriptive average, you might have to curve down again.
Yep. Yeah,
And so
it's
that's danger zone for
risky.
me for a whole lot of reasons.
So I love, Katie mentioned that flooding the canvas
Begging
for the
them. I know.
LMS, emails, announcement, pin the announcement to the top and put it in red,
Yes.
add it as it, depending on how you have your modules set up, add it as its own page. One of the things that, because that's a good point, Katie, like if I have a physical class, I can take the time to do it. But if I don't, how do I get those online course completions up? So even like posting a video, and I say a video because it's more personal, of you talking about, this is what this is for, this is why it's important, this is why I need you to do this to help me make this better. This is why I'm asking you, like just telling them the importance of it is at least a step forward
Yes.
and maybe encouraging their completion. And doing that with a video is a little more personal and it takes effort. And when you show effort, that shows them value,
Yes.
and I think
And
that that could be an interesting way in an online
I
class.
I absolutely agree with that, and integrating that into your entire semester. So, I'll be completely honest with you, Becky, and tell you my course evaluation response rates are really low. They're like in the
It's
20%.
hard.
I have mixed levels of motivation to get mine a little bit higher, but what I do is whether it's mid-semester feedback or end of the year course evaluation, and I'm just saying that to let you guys all know,
Yeah.
like, I'm one of those people where I'm like, I don't know if I really super care about response rates, but I do take all of my feedback, whether that's mid-semester, final, end of the year. I had a student who I know pretty well, have good rapport with him, and was like, "You come here." After the mid-semester, and I opened my computer and I was like, "Show me what you mean. You roasted me on this mid-semester evaluation." And again, had very good rapport with this student. I've had him before in class, and I was like, "Walk me through why you complained and what you want me to do to fix it." And he was like, "Why are," but he did, and then I fixed it. And he was like, "That right there. That's what I wanted." So my point in all this is integrating the changes you are making, whether it's last semester people really hated this, or people liked it but I wasn't getting a very high, like people forgot to do the assessment all the time. Showing them how any feedback is changing the way you are operating your course is such a useful metric, right? Because I integrate it into pretty much every single class period, where it's like, you know what, last year we did this way, I liked it, so I made a little tweak in this year, and talk about how I get it won't help you maybe this semester, but your feedback is making this course better for your future coworkers who are going to take my class next semester, or later on. And really pointing, if you can, in the mid-semester feedback, calling people out individually to say, "Loved that idea, would you mind talking with me more about that, because I would love to do it." So anything you can do to show tangible impact of you using course evaluation feedback in any capacity, whether it's mid or end of the semester, is so useful, I think. And I do
Yeah,
it all
for
the time.
motivating.
Integrate it into everything.
Yeah, I think for motivating them to do it, it's really, really useful because at the end of the day, as humans, we wanna feel valued,
Yes.
and so that shows and communicates that kind of value.
And heard, right?
And heard,
I
yes.
listen to you. I want
What
to make this change, but I'm not sure how. Help me.
and I a little bit agree with you on response rates. I want mine up because I want the feedback, not because I necessarily care about the number at the end, and it frustrates me to think that students might have feedback and they're just not giving it.
Yes. What's
But
missing that could have helped
yeah,
you, right?
what could have made it better? And it's not really for
Totally.
me demonstrating that I'm good at this. It's more, what am I missing that I could get more of? But at the same token, recognizing that if 50% of the students don't have anything to say, I guess it's fine. I guess it's fine, and sometimes fine when they have 5 or 6 classes a semester is fine. So
So
there's a little bit of
speaking
that
to
too.
that, and something I've noticed anecdotally from my students, and this is commentary, okay, is my students tend to focus on their professors who they are planning to give really negative feedback to.
I know.
And I even got a comment last semester, which was like, uh, he was like, "Tell your department chair this." I'm like, "I'm not telling my department chair this." He goes, "If I don't fill out your course evaluation, it means I like you. It means you're doing a great job because I have nothing to say." And I was like, "Thank you. That's very kind. Can you please write that on my course evaluation?" And this person did. I knew who it was. He was literally like, "Dear department chair, normally I wouldn't fill out a course evaluation for somebody I like, but I'm making an exception because she told me to." And so I think that's the focus, right? If
Yeah, I
things
think
went people are so much less likely to write a review when things went well. We need to write positive things.
yeah, we and
So I'm
also
like, "Yeah, I'll take it as a compliment,"
but also I do need the
tell me
positive
how awesome
feedback.
I am. Tell my department chair how great I am,
So
please.
I just sent in my yearly self-eval last week or the week before, and I used a quote that a student said in my evals from last fall, and I was like, "This person's quote is going to be written and stuck on my wall because this is gonna get me up every single day in perpetuity because it
Yes,
was so kind," and you just don't often get stuff
you
like that
don't. You
in
don't.
evals, so
Encouraging people to write that down, though, is so,
it's so important.
so important.
Yeah. Great. Well, this has been super interesting. Another one, I think we better start planning for longer chats. Thank you all for listening. If you have some strategies that might be helpful for the audience, please comment those. We would appreciate a subscribe anywhere YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. And don't hesitate to reach out. We will put some contact info in the show notes, and we will see you next time.